Professor Winston Moore, Deputy Principal of the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill Campus. Dr. Henderson Carter, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education. Dr. Rodney Worrell, Head of the Department of History, Philosophy, and Psychology. Members of the Faculty of Humanities and Education. Authors Dr. Cleve Scott and Dr. Gary Denny. Members of staff. Audine Wilkinson, whose name adorns a unit in the Sidney Martin Library. Norman Barrow, Managing Director of A&B Music Supplies. Students of the Constant Carmichael Project. Students of the University of the West Indies Cave Hill Campus. Our brothers and sisters from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Good evening. Sounds better. Before we engage in the proceedings relating to the book, we must do like what all Caribbean people do when we celebrate. We must engage in song and dance. And the very first item on our agenda this evening is entertainment by our very own Colin Spencer. Please welcome him to the stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to try to sing a song here now. Yeah. My sons and my daughters, to you I plead, what? Don't get no horrors, but please take heed. I know you don't want no sermon, but my admonition is to guard you against all the evils of life that create strife and destroy life. Walk cautiously, children, be alert, because you have an enemy roaming the earth. I know you're young and restless, but you don't have to be careless, because thinking leads unto righteousness, to happiness, spiritual bliss. That's why I tell you this. Watch out, my children. There is a fella called Lucifer with a bag of white powder. And he don't want a pound on your face, but to bring shame and disgrace. to the human world. Help me sing it, people. Watch out, my children. Watch out, my children. There is a fella called Lucifer with a bike of white powder. And he don't want to pound on your face, but to bring him and disgrace to this human race. I give you my counsel because I want to see all young people live righteously. What you feed your mind with forms your characteristics and shapes the path that you must walk tomorrow. Darkness or glow, joy or sorrow. That's why I'm concerned. Watch out, my children. Watch out, my children. There is a fella called Lucifer with a bag of white powder. And he don't want to powder your face, but to bring shame and disgrace to the human race. To all the Spanish-speaking children. Cuidado, mis hijos. Cuidado, mis hijos. Hay un hombre que se llama Lucifer, con una bolsa de polvo blanco. Y él no quiere empolvar tu cara, pero para traer pena y desgracia a la raza humana. You're young and your future is ahead of you. Right or wrong, sweet or sour, depends on what you do. Taking the wrong direction will drain your constitution and promote global mental chaos and confusion. Then corruption of the inner man. And that was not God's plan, but mighty. Watch out, my children. There is a fella called Lucifer with a bag of white powder. And he don't want to powder you, but to bring death to the human. Il y a quelqu'un qui Lucifer. Il ne vous pas soumontrer vos stades à porter il dépressé. Allez là, c'est pour me.
Another round of applause for Colin Spencer. Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you I can only speak one language, so I will not be trying to speak French or Spanish. Now, as we continue the journey, especially at the University of the West Indies, as we continue the journey to decolonize the story of the Caribbean, we come here to celebrate the launch of this St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a general history to the year 2023. I will not, 2025, I beg your pardon. I will not presuppose what will be said by Dr. Rodney Worrell, who's the head of the Department of History, Philosophy, and Psychology. But I will stress the importance of this publication to the wider development of a Caribbean story written by Caribbean people. And it is especially important that you fine folks have come out this evening to launch this book, which shows that you support a Caribbean story by Caribbean people. And I wish to thank you for coming this evening. As mentioned before, the next speaker will provide us with some remarks, Dr. Rodney Worrell. He's the head of the Department of History, Philosophy, and Psychology here at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus. Dr. Worrell.
Greetings, Principal, Deputy Principal, Professor Winston Moore, Dean Carter. Greetings. Now, at the very outset, I wish to thank you, the audience, for taking some time to come to celebrate with Dr. Scott, Dr. Denny, um, the publication of this wonderful work. Now, the publication of any book is something that is celebrated within the university because it is a joyous occasion. It is a historic moment. And today, they speaking on behalf of the Department of History, Philosophy, and Psychology. Yeah, we want to congratulate our colleague, Dr. Scott, as well as his comrades in arms, Dr. Denny and Dr. Fraser, for authoring this. And I describe it later on as a massive contribution to the neglected history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as the Eastern Caribbean. So the book, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, A General History to the Year 2025. And this is volume 1, Native Peoples, Genocide and African Enslavement in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, circa BP 5000 to 1838. As I mentioned, and I will stress it again, that this work is a massive contribution to the historiography of the Caribbean. And we know that the Eastern Caribbean has been neglected in terms of writing about its history. When we compare the Eastern Caribbean, for example, with Jamaica and Trinidad, they're tended to have gotten a lot more attention than the Eastern Caribbean. So I must congratulate the Vinci historians for taking up the task and writing this history, from the perspective of the peoples of St. Vincent, and also interrogating a lot more sources than, let us say, if it was written from the perspective of the colonizers. So this bit of revisionist history is a welcome addition to the unfolding Caribbean story. Now, hopefully, this publication will lead to other similar publications taking place elsewhere inside of the Eastern Caribbean. And we will see the voices of many of the neglected people, and we see the history coming from below, emerging from these various spaces. It is clear that St. Vincent and the Grenadines have a rich and wonderful history, as was manifested in the text. I had a brief peek at the text at lunch today, and I'm saying I must get my hands on this book. It was clear that the publication was motivated by an appreciation of the value of history to an understanding of the past, the present, and indeed the future. So I know we live in a moment when we tend to poo-poo and marginalize history, but this publication is timely in that it helps to prosecute the case for reparations and repartite justice, because in this work, we're seeing a deep discussion on genocide, we're seeing a deep discussion on slavery. So this text is adding to the evidence in the fight for repartite justice in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and in the wider Caribbean. And we hope that the state managers inside the region, St. Vincent as well will not only commission works like this, but they will also ensure and make sure that the students are exposed to the discipline of history. And they will make full use of textbooks of this nature. We live in an exciting period if you're a revolutionary, because this is a revolutionary moment. This is a moment of great trepidation and fear for most people, but we're witnessing the implosion of an empire and an appreciation of history would unravel some of the mysteries of the crisis of neoliberalism, the crisis of neo-fascism, the crisis of the Don Road Doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine, the Roosevelt corollary, the Trump corollary. All of these, if students had an appreciation for history, or if the state managers in the Caribbean had an appreciation for history, they will not let their hearts be troubled about these kind of developments taking place. And they would be familiar that the United States always had ambitions about, about including in the Caribbean and the colonial powers. You know, we see the theft of the Venezuelan oil, but there was the theft of the resources of the Caribbean at another historic moment. So the history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the history of the Caribbean, but more so that we're talking about St. Vincent and the Grenadines that is on full display tonight, is the history of resistance, the history of resisting genocide, a history of resisting slavery. And this resistance was conditioned with the creation of a better world for their children and their children's children. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to recommend that you purchase a copy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, A General History to the Year 2025. It is a must-have, and I certainly will purchase a copy for me and a copy for somebody else. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
I second that motion, that everyone in here purchase a copy of the book and one for someone else. Ladies and gentlemen, as we celebrate the launch of this book, and as we celebrate the three authors and the work they placed into this publication, we also celebrate the work of the University of the West Indies as they continue to rewrite history from a Caribbean perspective. In the midst of the research being carried out by Dr. Henderson Carter, who will speak later as it relates to the Constant Carmichael Project, we value and we celebrate the work being done by the University of the West Indies on a whole as it relates to our history and our heritage. And so I now invite to the stage to give us some remarks Professor Winston Moore, who is the Deputy Principal of the University of the West Indies, Kearfield campus.
It's always very strange that any chairperson is taller than you are. So distinguished guests, colleagues, students, members of the media, and everyone joining us in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and across the wider Caribbean via radio, Facebook, YouTube, good night. I bring you warm greetings on behalf of the senior management, staff, colleagues at the University of the West Indies Kearfield campus. It is indeed a great pleasure to be joining you tonight for the launch of a general history of the St. Vincent and Grenadines, co-authored by Adrian Fraser, Cleve Scott, and Gary Denny, and published by Ian Randall Publishers. It is especially fitting that all of the authors are graduates of the University of the West Indies. I'm very proud of that fact. And also always very proud of the fact that I graduated from the University of the West Indies. Just maybe like 10 years ago, not that long ago, just 10 years ago. It is, however, a reminder that the region's intellectual capital continues to be nurtured and mobilized through the UWI, and that our graduates remain deeply invested in strengthening Caribbean knowledge, identity, and development. This book is also significant because it's the first of 3 volumes. That matters. It signals the intention and seriousness of the authors. The intention to document the extension history and the story comprehensively and seriously. And it also says that these authors plan to make devote a significant amount of time to telling the story of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. From the perspective of the UWI Cape Hill campus, this launch sits very comfortably within the tradition of our work in Caribbean history and Caribbean thought. The Department of History, Philosophy, and Psychology, and the wider Faculty of Humanities and Education have long carried a responsibility that is both academic and public-facing to help the Caribbean people understand themselves, to interpret the past with rigor, and to make that understanding useful to national development. Unfortunately, I was not lucky enough to be a graduate of the Faculty of Humanities and Education. I was planning to become a historian, Dr. Carter, but life took a different route, and it ended up being a economist. But you never know, sometime in the future, I might revisit my roots. That commitment is reflected in the campus's deliberate efforts to convert scholarship into accessible outputs and practical engagement. For example, we have strengthened pathways that support academics and postgraduate students in turning research into publications and other professional outputs. We've also tried to marry the link between research and our private sector engagement as well. We're going to be very soon hearing about some of the really great work our scientists, UWI scientists, have been doing to work on the issue of diabetes. And hopefully you're soon going to have a shake within the supermarkets that you can purchase that has the UWI logo on it as well. And that's the link between society and the academy that we've been trying to develop here at the UWI Cape Hill campus. Now, as economists, I couldn't come to the podium without talking and speaking a little bit about numbers. Dr. Worrell, don't worry, I'm still on your side. In fact, my bedside reading is Das Kapital. So you'll be very proud of me. But I'm still gonna, go to my neoclassical roots here and talk a little bit about the economics of this type of work. And because it's not always understood the important role that history plays in terms of economic returns. And first, it reduces the cost of poor decision making. So societies that understand their institutional history societies that do not understand their institutional history often repeat policy errors, misread social signals, and struggle to build consensus. A strong national history, written carefully and made accessible, becomes part of the country's policy infrastructure. It shapes civic engagement, strengthens national cohesion, and supports better governance. Second, history creates marketable knowledge products. A national history is not only a book on a shelf, it supports school curricula, teacher training, university courses, museum exhibitions, documentaries, festivals, heritage trails, digital archives, podcasts, creative adaptations, lots of things that can be monetized. In modern economies, these are part of a so-called knowledge economy. They generate revenue directly, and they also generate visibility and reputation, which draw investment and visitors. Third, history strengthens cultural tourism and place branding, which in turn supports foreign exchange earnings and employment. Many countries have learned that heritage, when responsibly curated, is a renewable economic asset. It encourages longer stays, higher visitor spending, and shorter linkage and stronger linkages to local creative industries, food systems, transport, and small business services. When we ask about the size of this market, the global figures are substantial. International estimates suggest that heritage tourism represents a market measured in the hundreds of billions of US dollars. And wider travel and tourism is measured in the trillions of dollars. Now, I always tell persons when it comes to looking at these figures, the Caribbean does not need to get 10% of that market. You don't need 10% of $1 trillion. You just need 1% because of the size of Caribbean economies. And just that 1% of $1 trillion, that 1% of $1 billion would be make a significant difference to the economic outcomes within the Caribbean. And that is always our goal. That should always be our goal, just capturing a small piece of the market. And we would see a significant difference in terms of the economic outcomes. It's not my idea, by the way. That is from Arthur Lewis. So get the reference right. So what do these figures imply for small states like St. Vincent and the Grenadines? It suggests that even modest and well-targeted presence in these markets can yield very meaningful returns. We can see how countries have pursued this strategy in different ways. Some have deliberately expanded the export of cultural content through digital platforms and linked that content to film, education, and tourism. So this is why a book such as A General History of St. Vincent and the Grenadines matters. It is foundational infrastructure for a wider knowledge ecosystem. It places authoritative material into the public domain, and it also supports national education. It strengthens cultural confidence, and it invites scholarly debate. And it creates a platform upon which other products and initiatives can be built. Going forward, the UWI stands ready to partner on similar initiatives, including additional commissioned volumes, research programs on Vincentian development, archival and digitalization projects, heritage education, teacher support, museum and exhibition development, and the creation of digital learning tools that bring Vincentian history to regional and global audiences. You should see the UWI as a partner because we have always been a partner of St. Vincent and the rest of the Caribbean. So let me close by congratulating the authors for this very excellent achievement. Producing a general history is demanding work. It requires discipline, balance, and a willingness to carry responsibility for interpretation. I also commend Irando Publishers for the role it continues to play in disseminating Caribbean scholarship. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here tonight, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Professor Winston Moore, for linking history, heritage, and economics, only as Professor Winston Moore can. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, we have another musical presentation, this time by a very well-known and popular musician, Romancia Murray. Please welcome Romancia to the stage.
Good night, everybody. For the black man
I want to go home. I want to go home. Home to a place where I can see my race. I want to go home. Africa, I wanna see you. Africa, I wanna hear you. Africa, I wanna feel you in our lives. I wanna feel you in our lives. Burkina Faso, Burkina Faso, land of the upright, upright, land of the upright. Burkina Faso, Burkina Faso, and leave my minerals and go. Go, France, leave my minerals and go. They brought us to Americas in chains, invaded all the African plains. Europeans forced us to speak their language. They were strangers abroad and in our land. What am I to do with a place like this? Taking away your happiness. We want the warmth of life like all mankind. I want peace and happiness. Feelings of elation, filling my every emotion. Feelings flooding in for my land. Feelings overflowing for my land. Burkina Faso, Burkina Faso, land of the upright, land of the upright. Burkina Faso, Burkina Faso, and you leave my minerals and gold. Oh, and leave my minerals and gold. In all African countries, in all African diaspora, hands of Burkina Faso must be adopted. Solidarity must be our kind. We want to go home. We want to go home. Home to a place where I can see my way. We want to go home. Africa, I wanna see you. Africa, I wanna hear you. Africa, I wanna feel you in our arms. I wanna feel you in our arms. Burkina Faso, Burkina Faso, land of the upright, land of the upright. Burkina Faso, Burkina Faso, and you leave my minerals and go. Go, and you leave my minerals and go. Africa, I wanna hear you. Africa, I wanna see you. Africa, I wanna feel you in our arms. I wanna feel you in our arms. Let me up.
Thank you to Romancia Murray for that nourishing performance. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme for the night, as you will recognize, is the celebration of the reclamation of our story by our people. And that performance by Romancia Murray demonstrates the spirit within this room, which is that we demand that we tell our stories. So once again, we thank Romancia for that performance. We also continue to champion the cause of decolonization of the region, especially as it relates to our history. And Dr. Henderson Carter, as the lead researcher on the Constant Carmichael Project, has been contributing significantly to this effort. He will now provide for us a book review of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a general history to the year 2025. Dr. Carter?
Good night, everybody. I messed it up. Just bring it down a bit. Fix this as well. Thank you so much. If you were my history university class, you'd get 5 extra marks. It is a protocol having been established. I just want to welcome everybody to this historic occasion, this book launch. You know, when books are launched, it is a really exciting moment for everybody. It's like having the birth of a baby boy or baby girl. And when these things happen, there's tremendous excitement. And people know the time and the day that it happened and keep that time for posterity. Just last Sunday, the 11th, we launched the Constant Carmichael Conference. And oh, what a wonderful conference that was. And today at 8:45, we launched our 3rd radio program in the University of West Indies. It's called UWI Voices in Research. And thank you. And that came out of the Graduate School of Graduate Studies. And now today at 7, we have our 3rd baby. That is Dr. Scott and Dr. Denny and Dr. Fraser's book, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, A General History to the Year 2025, Volume 1. Now, Volume 1, as you can see here, is 299 pages. And when Dr. Scott said to me that they're writing 3 volumes, I encouraged him because, 3 volumes is a lot of work. People in their entire careers only write 1 book. But Scott and his colleagues are endeavoring to write 2 others. And give them a round of applause. It's a tremendous achievement to do all this. And not only to write it in this way, but to consult all the sources that a historian would consult. The CO series, CO 262, CO 266. There's the Colonial Office series. I mean, that is what you call hard work, because the CO series, you have to read it with a magnifying glass. It's not easy to read. And sometimes I don't like to do it, I must admit. So I would get somebody to go and copy something for me. But to read the CO series consistently is in itself a monumental task. And I want to congratulate you all. And of course, they're more serious to read because you're coming up through the 19th century and into the 20th century. So I'm really happy today that we have the birth of this text. And I want to congratulate Cleve and Denny, and I want to congratulate Miss Dr. Fraser, who's not here, for the hard work that they have put in this text. I just want to say a few words tonight about the text itself. What is in the text? And I'll end with the importance of the text. And much of what Professor Moore said tonight is within my speech. You probably saw my speech. And I want to start where the text starts. And the authors found time to answer the question, the importance of history. Why history? So yes, they're dealing with St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but they found time to ask the question, why is history important? And they quoted Ralph Gonsalves, former Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who made the point that history helps us to understand ourselves. It looks at who we are as a people, what we have been, where we are going, and what we are capable of, to quote Ralph Gonsalves. I repeat that. Understanding of ourselves, who we are, what we have been, where we are going, and what we are capable of. And that tells us, therefore, that history is at the heart of development, not a subject that just excites people with a few stories, but is really at the heart of development. It is a subject that ought to be taken by our politicians because they chart paths, by our civil service, by our students within the university, and we endeavor to ensure that all of our students take Caribbean civilization or introduction to history, which is a good thing. But I think we have to go a bit further and deeper to ensure that in the primary schools and in the secondary schools from forms 1 to 3, that the students come face to face with history. It is possible today that you could go to school for 5 years and then another 2 years at community college and come through the university and not engage with history. Because people can do social studies and take that path, and you do Caribbean civilization, which is compulsory. But it is possible for that to happen, that students could come up and become civil servants and politicians and prime ministers and have not heard about the Monroe Doctrine. Yes, that's possible. And it is happening. And we have to make some serious decisions in the region, not only in Barbados, in the region, to say to our leaders, that history must be taught in all of our schools, every single one. My view is that if you want people to love your country and not to commit the heinous crimes that are being committed, it's important to get them to love their society, their village, their school, and their country. I believe that a lot of this crime is coming about because people do not love their country, they don't appreciate the country, they don't know about the struggles that we have made or the struggles made on our behalf. So we have people walking about the country proclaiming boldly and foolishly, "I'm not voting." Not knowing that in 1935, only 3,500 people voted in this country. And there was a struggle between 1935 and 1951, led by Crawford, Adams, all of these early politicians, even Charles Duncan O'Neill, to get the vote for black people. When the whites were saying that niggers, no, we want them in here. I don't want to quote the person because there's a business place in the person's name today. 3,500 people voted in 1935. But in the 1951 election, held on the 13th of December, 95,000 people voted. 95,000 people. And the point that I'm making today is that those people who are walking about saying they're not voting don't understand the struggle that it took to get the vote in the first place. They don't appreciate the struggle. So they don't know where we were. And they don't know where we're going either. Because that type of nonsense coming from the mouths of educated people will lead us into trouble. Suppose all of us sit down and say, well, we are voting. You know what happened? Chaos. Chaos. So I want to say, therefore, if we are going to maintain this democratic ethos and maintain this democratic society, we have to put history back on the curriculum. But I want to go further in the book. The book shows how the First Nation people settled St. Vincent and the Grenadines and how they transformed an area of virgin land to settle communities. And it shows how the Europeans came and demanded land. And it's like history repeating itself again. Another group comes and they're demanding land from certain places. It also shows why the Garifuna and the Kalinago refused to give up their land. Now, I love this resistance. Here are people with big guns and cannon, and the Garifuna and the Kalinago are saying, no, we are not giving up this land. And the authors show how land was perceived by the Kalinago and the Garifuna. Land was food security. Land was shelter. Land contained the graves of the ancestors. How are you going to give up that? And the book also explains why St. Vincent and the Grenadines did not experience the sugar revolution in the 1640s. Because here the Garifuna and the Kalinago holding up this drive by the English and the French to expand the country, to plant sugar, etc. So that sugar revolution only came after They had subdued the Garifuna after 1797. And then you see the flood of enslaved Africans, 16,000 of them imported between 1791 and 1795. And then you see sugar production increasing, rivaling, the authors argue, Barbados in terms of its volume. For me, the best part of the book is the resistance of Châteauneuf. That's the part that I love. Early last year, I was given an opportunity to visit St. Vincent. And Cleve took me to Dorsetshire Hill, where Châteauneuf met his death, it is supposed. And there's nothing like going to the place. There's nothing like seeing the place itself. Because Dorsetshire Hill is not only that place of battle, but it's also the place where poor white people from Barbados were sent. And I believe they still live there, Cleve. And that happened in the 1860s. But here is Châteauneuf waging a war of resistance from the 1770s right up until he's finally ambushed in the dead of the night. Then you have the final surrender of the Garifuna people. And that surrender led to their removal from St. Vincent and the Grenadines to Balasso, a small island of 320 acres, without rivers, with barren land, without water, to host 5,000 people. I want you to understand that 320 acres, which is the plantation like Warren's today, or the Bell Plantation, but without rivers, without streams, and there are 5,000 people living there. Lots of people starved. Lots of people died from diseases. And then in 1797, the British take some 2,000 of them to Roatan in the Bay of Honduras, finally off that barren island. That story is a story of genocide. How could you take 5,000 people away from their homeland to a place where you know they're going to starve? That is a story of genocide. That is the evidence we need to make the point about reparations. And that is the importance of the book. That even though we're talking about reparations, we need to do the research, do the spread work, to say to our communities, this is the evidence. And then to make that point in international courts, this is the evidence. My view is that reparations, that movement, will become stronger when histories like these are written. So it's not just about saying, yes, we want reparations. It is saying, look, this has been done. Thousands of people lost their lives because of starvation, and therefore reparations are due. So this book is a good tool for us to go forward with the concept of reparations, because it looks at the genocide of the Garifuna people. Within the text, we hear and we feel the voice of the enslaved. There's an enslaved man called Ashton Warner, who is owned by James Wilson at Cane Grove Plantation. And Warner tells us about slavery. And I love this perspective because sometimes we get the perspective of the stipendiary magistrate, the perspective of the governor, but not the enslaved person. So listen to Warner on page 155. I quote, "The whole gang of field slaves is divided into spills, and every man able to work has not only to endure crop time, the severe daily labor, but to work half the night also, or 3 whole nights in the week." So these people are working night and day, especially in the boiling house and in the rum house. I continue to quote Warner. "The work is very severe, and great numbers of the slaves during this period stink under it and become ill. But if they complain, their complaints are not readily believed or are considered only a pretense to escape from labor." End of quote. So within the text, the writers help us to understand what is happening on the plantations through the voice of the enslaved. And I congratulate and I commend the writers for this, for giving us that perspective and the other voices as well. I want to move quickly to the importance of the book. I want to make 4 points, not long. We in the Caribbean are building our nations. I like to talk about the nation building process. We're not just existing, living from day to day, and eating food and drinking rum and drinking Coke and eating macaroni pie. We are building nations. We want our nations to become strong and mighty, not with guns and weapons, but in terms of what we produce, our people, and our culture. We are in the middle of a nation building process. Barbados is over almost 60 years as a nation. St. Vincent is also striving in this nation building process. No nation can survive or thrive without a history. No person can thrive or survive without a history. Even when you go to the doctor has all your history there. The doctor can't really deal with you without knowing what's happened. And we must have in our societies history to help us to build our nation. So our nation is not only built by lovely buildings and highways and forts, etc. Our nation is built by what we write. And I'm happy today that the history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is written by Vincentians and not Bajans or an Englishman, and is written from below, not from above, not from the perspective of the governors and the stipendiary magistrates, but written from the perspective of the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Garifuna, the Kalinago, the African enslaved people, the free villagers, the peasants. This is how you build a nation. And I want to say to us today, this book is part of the nation building process. And I congratulate the authors for helping us on this road. Secondly, the text helps us to understand the knowledge economy. And this is the point made by Professor Moore just now, that there's something called a knowledge economy. That a book is not only made to adorn the shelves and those and the libraries, etc. But there's a lot that we can do with this or what is in here. For example, I see that there's tremendous scope to use events and stories from this text for tour guiding in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Tremendous scope. And I had a tour myself of St. Vincent one Sunday morning, looking at the areas, looking to see the deficiencies, looking to see what can be done. And there's tremendous scope using this. But there's also scope for podcasts. We've shown here, through Today in Bajan history and Today in Cricket history, that you can serve history in small nuggets to people, 3-minute nuggets, and give them a daily dose, a daily pill of vitamin every day to strengthen people. And I want to recommend strongly, and this is the second time I'm making this point, please, that you start something called Today in Vincentian History. You got the ammunition. You got hordes of historians all over St. Vincent. And I'm sure Denny here would help you. You have TV stations and radio stations waiting for the material. And students and graduates waiting to be engaged. And people thirsting for the information. Thirsty to hear about Châtelet and all these people. This is an opportunity to do some podcasts. It is also an opportunity to write some documentaries. So the book helps us to understand the knowledge economy. And I hope that it be used in that way. Thirdly, the text strengthens the case for reparations. We've heard about Balaso. But I want to bring up a place called Black Point. Is it Black Point? Black Point, yes, Black Point. When I was in St. Vincent, they took me to this place. Now, I teach about it in history, but this is the first time I'm going there. And this is a large rock from here, 2 times the size of this building, of granite. And the slave master orders his enslaved Africans and Kalinago people to cut a tunnel in this granite rock. A tunnel. So that exports can easily be done through the tunnel. Now, granite is a very hard rock. I cannot imagine how enslaved people would have done all of that without pay. I cannot imagine how many enslaved people would have died as a result of that hard work. So when you look at the text itself, you see many instances where enslaved people were killed and worked beyond measure. And this book strengthens the case, not only for reparations, for genocide, but reparations for African enslavement as well. And finally, It helps the nation understand the struggle of their heroes. Sometimes we don't fully comprehend those people who've gone before, on whose shoulders we stand. The struggle of people to fight for their land. And it helps us to think now of my contribution. What can I do to assist in the nation building process? What is my contribution? Am I just going to live and enjoy my life? Or am I going to do something positive for my country? This book forces me to think about what I'm supposed to do. That is why today we celebrate with Cleve and Gary the arrival of their new baby. And you could see the excitement on Cleve's face a couple of Sundays ago when the book came. It's like he had a third child. But there's excitement all around, and your presence here underscores that excitement. That you could come back here and celebrate here in Barbados. And of course, I understand there's going to be celebration in other countries as well, to make the point that a baby has now been born. An important book, History of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. When these books come in their fullness, I will buy not only 2, but I'll buy 4. Thank you very much.
So the challenge has been set. We now will buy 1 for ourselves, 1 for someone else, and 2 more copies. We will now have extracts from the book being read by students, by the authors. Okay. So we invite Dr. Gary Denny and Dr. Cleve Scott to take a seat at the desk here.
Today, the 2 superpowers are on the developing war between Iran and
This is Caribbean.
We need a solution. It's my illusion. It's just one solution. The hope for tomorrow is nothing today. Driver, it's gonna help us. I say, Israelites, the answer, black and white. Stop.
Well, my first obligation is to thank all of you for being here. And if I knew that you would all be here, we would have written a better book. I'm really quite delighted that the reflections which have been shared
quite great food for thought. The notion of the knowledge economy, the ways in which the book can be a catalyst for generating, new ways of thinking how to develop St. Vincent, but also the broader Caribbean. All of these things are meaningful to me. So I will have to. I think this stuff has been recorded, so I will need to listen again to some of the wonderful ideas which have been shared, because these are not things which I would like to forget at all. And so I do thank our esteemed colleagues for really giving us some wonderful pointers, and I am very grateful for it. I'm also happy to be here on this campus because I'm a Kivil man, and sometimes the world works in ways that you can't really write the script. That these things emerge. Perhaps the universe sometimes get things right, and so we, did indeed begin from the proposition that as Vincentian historians, we have an obligation, to look at that absence of serious scholarship that tells the history of St. Vincent in a way that is coherent, in a way that is accessible to a broad Vincentian public, and in a way that would allow students, at the University of the West Indies not to have had my experience when I came here. And this is, my finest experience is clearly at Caville, but it is also true to say that as a student of history, I learned little to nothing about Vincentian history while a student at Caville, because there was nothing written in the manner that we've done today, except of course, some chapters here and there and so on. So this for me is a wonderful moment. And then to know that Cleve and Adrian and myself, we're all graduates of the University of the West Indies. I mean, so we're not simply Vincentians, we are Caribbean people. And this institution has been absolutely crucial, the foundation. I mean, I cannot think in the manner I do. I cannot write in the way I do. None of these things is possible without being here. So there's a linkage between St. Vincent and the University of the West Indies, which is inescapable and which is necessary. And I wish to applaud you for recognizing that.
I would like to begin by explaining how we came to this project. This project was first conceptualized in 1994 at a lecture developed by Sir Hilary Beckers. Of course, at that time, he wasn't Sir Hilary. He was the head of the Department of History, and we had a lecture in St. Vincent and the Grenadines I organized. And at that occasion, he made the case for a national history. I became a postgraduate in 1994, and by 1998, when I thought I would no longer be a postgraduate, I wrote a proposal and took it to then Dr. Fraser, Adrian Fraser, and he was excited. In 2001, when the government changed office, we submitted a proposal, and the government at the time was not interested in it. About 6 years ago, I was listening to the Independence Parade, and I heard my name called, and I heard Dr. Denny name called, and I heard Dr. Fraser name called. And I contacted each of them, and they knew nothing. But days later, we got a letter from the Ministry of Culture indicating that the government would like to support such a work. And so we thank former Prime Minister, Dr. Ralph E. Gonsalves, for facilitating the work. And also in the book, if you go to the conclusion, which we'll get to later, you see we thank also the incoming Prime Minister, Godwin Friday, who is a historian and who came to me soon after the work was commissioned, promising that anytime he comes to office, he would follow all of the volumes. So we thank both governments. So a round of applause. Now, my good friend Jules Williams, Managing Director of WFM, who's here tonight and show the world could hear and see us. He asked me a question, and Joe's an electronic engineer. He don't like history. We went to school together. He didn't like history. He doesn't like science. And he asked a good question today. He asked me, how did we write this book? It was a very good question because Dr. Denny is based in Maryland. Where's Maryland again? Yeah. ISIS that you don't have to be worried. Yeah, he's based in Maryland at St. Mary's College. Dr. Fraser's based in St. Vincent, and Dr. Fraser is represented tonight by his daughter, Nayara. Please stand. And turn around to the camera. Turn around to the camera, we'll get you. Right, he's represented there. He's based in St. Vincent, and everybody know, well, deputy principal 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 5 times. 50-50, I'm here and in St. Vincent. Everybody knows that. That's no secret, right? So when we conceptualize this project in the budget, I had a line item for Zoom. And the officials didn't know what Zoom, they wanted to know what was Zoom. And it so happened 2 months after, COVID came and everybody had Zoom. Everybody had Zoom. So Dr. Fraser, he quickly learned how to use Zoom and so on. We meet 2 to 3 times weekly for 2 to 3 hours. 2 to 3 hours weekly. And then we have a WhatsApp group where we meet every day up until at midnight, because at midnight your father says it's bedtime. Dr. Fraser would say it's bedtime. And then me and Dr. Denny will be there sometime till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, exchanging ideas, analyzing the sources and so on. So that's how we did it. Then I would take everything, put it together, do drafts, and Dr. Fraser, being the expert English writer, would check every full stop, comma, and then we'll come together and do it as well. And we must acknowledge Dr. Arnold Thomas. He's not an author in this volume. He's an author in the second volume, where we look at East Indian indentureship. So in the second volume, you'll see 4 authors' names. Then we take the text and we send it to a variety of persons to read. But I must mention, in between, we invite people to the meetings. We invited no less than probably 50 Vincentian experts in different fields, in gender, in medicine, in construction, in almost everything, wherever you are in the world.
Botany.
Yeah, botany. And they would respond to what we have written and what ideas we have taken. When we have finished that now, we send it to further export. And the last export we sent it to was Dr. Henderson Carter. And if it's one person who really made this book come to the publication, was Dr. Carter. I'll tell you what. We have this project, the Constant Carmichael Project, where we go around North America. And every corner, all I hear in my ears, Cleve, we got to get this book to publication. You call Randall, we got to get this book to publication. And because of his insistence, I had no choice but to call Ian Randall, who published the book, right? And not only did Dr. Carter read the book, he made suggestions how to improve it. For example, we had some chapters that were fairly long, and we knew they were long, but we wanted the feedback, and he recommended how to cut them and so on. And if you look at the back of the book, he wrote the assessment, and we thank him tonight. Good. So what we're going to do now, we're going to have students all from K-ville, both undergrad and postgraduate. They're going to read extracts. They selected them, and then we will respond to these extracts. So we're going to start with the introduction. The students will introduce themselves, and then we would respond to the extracts, sorry. So we start with the introduction. The prelude, the first one, the prelude.
Good night, everyone. So I'm going to start. You too. Understanding and appreciating the strides modern Vincentians have made means fully engaging the linked histories of native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies, which in the subject of Volume 1 of the History of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Besides being home to indigenous peoples who are the foundation of the Caribbean civilization, the territory was the center of what was referred to as the Carib Republic for centuries. It was also where a genotype had emerged as exemplified by the Garigano or Garifuna. Moreover, it was a place where the philosophy and praxis of violent resistance to European colonization and imperialism were evident.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful extract that you have chosen. And there are many things which we can say about that extract, but I'm going to. The notion of linked histories, that is an extraordinarily important point that is critical to this book, because we have in numerous places people who have some things to say about the Guy Fuda. We also have, in other places, people who have some things to say about enslavement in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Nowhere do we have linked histories. Okay. And the reason why this is so important is that if we take Barbados, as a prime example of the history of enslavement, as Professor Hilary Beckles observed a week or so ago, when the Europeans arrived here, the country was empty of people. But of course, we also know that Barbados became the first slave society in the history of the hemisphere. St. Vincent became the last, some 150 plus years later. And we go on, what happened here? Well, the answer has to do with the indigenous peoples in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that they fought the British for 150 years, and that for the plantation project, the imposition of a slave society to take place in St. Vincent, it was necessary to eliminate the indigenous peoples. And the British are making that point as early as the 1770s. So it is crucial to understand that in St. Vincent, genocide wasn't, and enslavement, they weren't like sequential, coincidental. They were causational. And that separates St. Vincent from several other Caribbean islands. And so that's a crucial piece of reading that you've made here.
Something else to underscore is the notion of a Carib Emporium, a Carib Emporium. Dr. Denny, you're always fascinated by this terminology. You could expand on that.
Well, language is crucial. And I did a degree in literature right at this university. Language is crucial. The notion of Carib Imperium. Okay. These are Englishmen writing that when they arrive in the Americas and they look at Dominica, St. Lucia, Guadeloupe, St. Vincent, they see a Carib Imperium. Well, what does Imperium mean? It's a center of power. It's governance. So they recognize that here, in these waters of ours, okay, that indigenous peoples had succeeded in constructing a sense of belongingness, a sense of governance, a sense of territorial integrity, well, which they had to defend against the penetration of the invaders. Hence, a Caribbean imperium.
And that's why in the text we don't use the terminology Caribous, we use the terminology wars for sovereignty. And also in the text we make the point that it was very clear to the British, in order to take control of the lands, you had to
destroy the indigenous peoples. There's no other way. Genocide was a necessary, a precondition for the imposition of a slave society in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
As one soldier wrote, we had suspended the rules of war, and we are going to exterminate the savages. It's in the text. It's one of the reports that the military wrote back to the headquarters in London. So that's the prelude Next, we have introduction. The prelude was read by Miss Carlin Barrow. She'll introduce herself. I don't know why. She's doing a PhD in history under the supervision of Dr. Henderson Carter, the dean, on the Constant and Carmichael plantation. Carlin, please stand again and take a bow. Make sure the cameras get you. Next, please introduce yourself.
Good night. My name is. Good night. My name is Stefan Cheltenham. I'm an undergraduate in the Faculty of Humanities and Education. I'll be reading an excerpt from the introduction of the book at hand. Slave society and the economy never became fully entrenched in this economy as it had been in Barbados or Jamaica since the 17th century. In 1807, the British government passed the Abolition Act to end the transatlantic slave trade throughout the British Empire. Therefore, from 1808, it was illegal for British ships to participate in the trade in enslaved Africans, and so the British Navy was empowered to stop suspicious ships in order to search for the now illegal cargo to liberate them. After 1807, about 1,000 of these liberated Africans were settled on St. Vincent. There are few first-hand accounts of the chattel slavery experience from the enslaved themselves. Among these is the 1831 autobiography of Ashton Warner, who was born and enslaved on Cane Grove Estate in the Buckermont Valley on the western or leeward side of St. Vincent. It was his Aunt Daphne Crosby who secured his freedom, along with his mother, by effecting a manumission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. That extract mentions two or three critical things. The first one is that because the slave trade ended in 1807 and St. Vincent became a slave society around 1800. Now, in the book, we distinguish between a slave holding and a slave society. In fact, during the conference last week on Shelter Island, we made that point where Shelter Island was a slave holding. Slave holding means that there are enslaved people there, but you don't have all the instruments and systems as you would have where slavery determines everything. Barbados, for example, we know, according to Professor Beckles, is the first slave society in this part after Brazil. Good. So, as Dr. Carter mentioned earlier, having driven the Garifuna out of St. Vincent, when we say the out, haven't taken control because there are some Garifuna who remain, but they are not in enough numbers to create a problem. It means that you have about 7, 8, 9, 10 years to bring in enslaved people directly from Africa. And so you have, after 1807, what we call the intercolonial slave trade. And again, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles has written extensively on this. And this means that enslaved people are being brought from other countries, from Barbados, from Dominica, Guadeloupe, Tortola, and the Bahamas. In fact, on an estate called Grand Sable, which is what Dr. Carter referred to, Black Point, that was on Grand Sable, Brung, the owner, he brought 600 enslaved people, plus 600 plus, from one plantation in the Bahamas. And there are historians who argue that these enslaved people were Baptists and they contributed to the emergence of the spiritual Baptist faith. Okay? Now, the other thing that the extract refers to, and again, Dr. Carter referred to it, is the slave narrative of Ashton Warner. I would say to you that when the editor went through the book, the publisher, not the editor, the publisher, He asks us why we keep referring him to Ashton Warner, not Ashton or Warner. And we made the point that during slavery, most people were known by one name, like Bossa, right? Or Coffee. And to name Ashton Warner, it means that you are somebody. It's like Marcus Garvey, his wife and children had to call him Mr. Garvey. Right? Think about that, Mr. Garvey. And people want to know, Marcus Garvey had to be a madman. The point is, he always wanted to be referred in a respectable way. He was convinced that if you don't address him respectfully, others will not address him. Next, thank you very much, Stefan. And we call Stefan Bongo. So that's my preferred name, Stefan Bongo Sheltonat.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marsha Dottin Chandler. I just completed my BA in history, and I am a writer, researcher, and reader for Today in Bayesian History. I'm reading from the first chapter. The failure to date Vincentian history from its earliest beginnings can be attributed to three factors. First, archaeologists have dominated the production of knowledge of prehistoric St. Vincent and the Grenadines, with a focus on sequencing the chronology of the pottery found at more than 150 archaeological sites in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This earliest pottery of people described as the Saladoid people, of whom we shall say more at a later stage, extends perhaps as far back as 2,500 years. This reliance on the pottery evidence explains why some scholars can easily dismiss 2,000 years of Vincentian history and treat the beginning of the Saladoid presence on St. Vincent as the beginning of Vincentian history. Thank you.
One of my concerns, or maybe aspirations might be a better word. We had to choose language with a level of precision. So aspiration is better. For Vincentian history, but also for Caribbean history in general, is that our people need to have a sense of astonishment at what that history means. So, I have been trained in African history. I left UWI, sent me, to Johns Hopkins, where I did a PhD in African history. And when you do African history, okay, and you begin to look at the civilizations of, ancient Egypt and others, or if you're teaching, foundations of world history, and you begin to do the histories of places like Sumer and Babylon, and so on. One of the fundamental propositions within that kind of historical work is the value that is given to longevity, to the fact that human civilizations emerged at such a long time. So antiquity, longevity, duration. And yet in the Caribbean, what we do know is that in fact, people left Venezuela, arrived in Trinidad about 7,000 years ago, arrived in St. Vincent about 5,000 years ago. What that actually means is that when Vincentians walk Kingston and these other places, we are walking the roads which people have walked 5,000 years before, and we don't know that. And we don't feel what it means to be really in the legacies. The pathways become roads. Our culinary traditions have long histories based on the foods which the first people decided to eat. And so there's a whole range of legacies that go back thousands of years. And that kind of astonishment is something that I think we need to recognize. And that piece of writing is designed to do just that.
Thank you very much, Marsha. Marsha will be back next academic year, right, Ed? To do her PhD in history. Well, we don't have any archaeology, Marsha, sorry. Marsha really loves archaeology. She was in our field school in the summer, deputy principal. Good. Who's next?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Reed Donald Vickers. I'm a first year history student here at UWI Cave Hill. I'm reading from chapter 2, Resistance to European Colonization 1796. The Kalinago joined the struggle. Columbus's landing launched what noted historian of the Caribbean, Barry Hickman, has labeled as the Columbian cataclysm. The fact is that across much of the Americas, the arrival of Columbus brought genocide at a speed and scale without precedent in the modern world. It led to the destruction of the world that the first peoples knew. What is truly remarkable about the Kalinago in St. Vincent and the Lesser Antilles, however, is that they did not immediately succumb to the genocidal sweep of the European presence and to the European incursion into their lands with force. These indigenous peoples' defense of their territorial sovereignty would give birth to a philosophy of resistance in Caribbean civilization and a central principle in Caribbean intellectual thought.
This colleague of mine is abusing my goodwill. He keeps passing the mic. It is a wonderful passage because the conclusion line that Caribbean intellectual thought is founded upon the principle of resistance. And we see that resistance from the very beginning in the context of the indigenous people's response to the penetration of the Caribbean by the interlopers. Okay. But what is so fascinating about St. Vincent in this instance, when I talk Caribbean History 1 and 2 with Professor Beckles, okay, Beckles has an article which he spoke about the 200 years of black resistance to slavery and so on. And I was suitably impressed because after all, Beckles, was, just simply a wonderful, wonderful teacher. But in fact, it occurred to me that if we shift away from the story of African enslavement and African resistance, and we begin instead with the story of the indigenous peoples having to fight European penetration, then what we see is that as early as the 1500s, people from St. Vincent are leaving St. Vincent, heading into Puerto Rico and other places to fight the Spaniards from the very beginning. And what we see is that in 1797, even up to 1806, they're still fighting 300 years of resistance. 300 years of indigenous resistance.
What he didn't mention is that as an undergrad here, he got, was it first class honors? And then he was sent to Mona, where he met Barry Hickman, Professor Barry Hickman, the legendary Australian who worked with the UE and did a lot of work. And when we were discussing this issue, all he jumped and said, Barry Hickman. And he wrote those lines. Adrian Fraser, not me, wrote those lines. He wrote those lines. And Dr. Carter did not interfere with those lines. So a round of applause for Dr. Deddy. Next. Next. Mike.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
My name is Wilmont St. Cyr, second year student at the University of West Indies, Faculties of Humanity and Education. I'm going to read from you an extract from this wonderful book, and it's titled A Date with Destiny. This is chapter 3, A Date with Destiny. the year 1795. In 1795, the British were at war again with the Garifuna. This war, which to be the final defeat of their sovereignty, led to the imprisonment of the native warriors and their subsequent banishment. Hence, it can be cited as Chatayer's date with destiny. What lay ahead would be genocide, his final chapter. In preparation for possible attacks from the French forces, Vice Admiral Colonel James Seton, governor of St. Vincent from 1787 to 1798, called out the militia. He also summoned the Garifuna chiefs to meet with him in keeping with the terms spelled out in the 1773 treaty. The following day, the local colonial government received news of the possibility of the Garifuna attack. The Garifuna and Mariaqua, neighboring areas such as Massarakwa, north of Bayou, claimed not to have known of any intended attack on the British. William Young stated that on Sunday, March the 8th, the Garifuna attended a Sunday market and assumed a more than common air of social ease and festivity, reducing tension among the English. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wilmot. Now, I will tell you, those lines were written by Dr. Adrian Fraser. Those lines were written by him. He had done some work previously on Chatier and the guy Foda. But what we tried to do in that section is for the first time to give a vivid account of the war. And that's why Dr. Carter said he found it so intriguing, because I personally put a lot of effort into trying to put together the military aspect of it, because I was convinced that many people believe that Châteauguay and the Garifuna was an easy walk over. So in the text, we explain the tactics, the military tactics. In fact, and Naira, it took me a couple of days explaining military tactics and the art of war to both Denny and Dr. Denny, so that they go to understand. And once it became clear to them, they understood that this account of an easy defeat of Châteauguay was a no-no. In fact, what the British had to do was to create a separate army called the St. Vincent Rangers, which was comprised of only black enslaved people. These enslaved people were, what we use, rented, hired out, Dr. Carter, hired out to the militia, and the owners would be paid, and the enslaved were told that once you win the battles, you would get your freedom. And in the book, it explains all of that after the Garifuna were removed, they refused to give these people their freedom. And okay, so that section is indeed, it is cutting edge, it is totally new. You won't find that in anywhere else. Thank you very much, Wilmot. Sincere. Sincere. Not S-I-N-C-E-R, C-Y-R. Next, please. And all of those readers are our students in the Department of History, and they're all part of the Constant Carmichael Plantation Project and the new generation of historians.
Good night. My name is Teresa Douglas Patterson. I am a second-year student, a history special student. I'm reading from Chapter 4, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, A General History to the year 2025, Chapter 4, The Sugar Plantation Complex and Chattel Slavery, 1797 to 1834. Like elsewhere in the British Caribbean, St. Vincent and the Grenadines participated in the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans. The case of the ship named Juba, which was owned by the British firm James Rogers and Company, is emblematic of the trade in enslaved Africans to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In 1787, the Juba left Bristol for Nigeria. On arrival, it boarded 230 African captives, along with a ton and a half of ivory, 28 barrels of palm oil, and 5 tons of redwood, which was to be used to make dye. The trip took from Africa to mainland St. Vincent took 6 weeks, 13 weeks instead of the standard 6 weeks, as the weather was very bad.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Yeah. And all of my students are excellent readers. Jules, you have a problem? You get some radio announcers there. Right. Now, what we did in that section is to give the reader a vivid image of the journey from Africa to the Caribbean. Because being a history teacher and a student of history, typically when you take up a textbook, and I like to quote Professor Beckles here, you just see all these numbers. Mind you, I like numbers, but not as much as my sister. I see her there hiding, Dr. Anki Scott Joseph. She's econometrics. She loves numbers. In fact, there's 6 siblings, right? And we all come from a mathematics family, but I am the only one who's in the humanities. I don't like numbers. And that's what we try to do there, is to take the numbers that people like Professor Winston Moore likes and my sister likes, and put the human image on it. You could see the actual voyage, the difficulty, how long it takes, and that's what we try to do there. Throughout the text, we work hard to put real people in the text. When you go through this text, you're going to see real people. In fact, it's going to be even more intense in volume 2. In volume 2, we follow people through their lives, some people through their lives, right? So that's what we do. Thank you very much, Teresa Patterson Douglas. Excellent reader. Next.
Good night, everyone. Can you all hear me? My name is Clyde Harper.
Mike Harper, we on radio.
My name is Clyde Harper. There we go. My name is Clyde Harper. I'm a postgraduate student, Inheritance Studies. I'm reading from chapter 5. The most visible and audible demonstration of the African underpinnings of the Venetian Wesleyan Methodism was the form of worship. Hitler observed the freedom with which the enslaved worshiped. They sang, they prayed, they preached, and above all, they communed with one another. In Hitler's words, freely. Through this collective exaltation of God, the enslaved experienced a religious exaltation that is immeasurable. As the reggae singer Luciano puts it, God give me strength to fight another day. This is a sensibility which enslaved Venetians understood as seen in their commitment to Methodism.
Thank you very much. I know the Luciano you like, you love Luciano, that's why you took the part.
Excuse my American accent if I mispronounce any of those words.
Thank you very much. All right. Now, throughout the text, you're going to see we use a lot of Vincentian terminologies. We refer to Vincentian music. For example, we played Beckett earlier, Luciano, and other artists and so on. Okay? Now, the final reader, the final reader is my wife, and she is symbolic. I'll tell you why. And we start with Dr. Denny. Dr. Denny, tell them about your wife.
I think she's listening. So I have to be very careful what I say. My wife is a principal, a middle school principal. And she won the Principal of the Year award in Maryland this year. It's an extraordinary achievement. And so I always have to be on my P's and Q's because, she is a principal.
So she's going to tell about her mom. I had the opportunity to work on mom as well. Okay.
You want to know about my mom? What can I say? My mom is I guess, the stronghold of the family. She's the one, obviously the backbone, while my father was out doing what he had to do. She's Dominican. Similarly, she's a graduate of the Cable campus. That's actually where they met here in Barbados. Um, and she's as brilliant as my father. I don't know what else to say.
Right. So I met my wife at Cable too. We were doing history. So what she didn't say, her mom is a history. Yeah, her mom is a history teacher. My wife is a history teacher. His wife is a teacher. So the three authors, we are all married to teachers. And not only teachers, they're very good at English language and history. So tonight, my wife is representing all of the wives for the three historians.
Well, he put me in a position now because I can't afford to make any mistakes. Anyhow, notwithstanding the challenges women experience under apprenticeship, the system had simultaneously ushered in a new regime of regulations and laws that empowered black and colored women who had mothered children for white men. Non white women now had the opportunity to demand child support from white fathers of their children. In 1838, a white estate manager had set up a young black woman for gross insubordination. The evidence presented at the hearing revealed that the manager became angry when the young woman's mother demanded child support for the grandchildren. The young woman and a deceased sister had a total of three children for this manager. The manager, hearing of his humiliation in court, retaliated by terrorizing the young woman and her mother. A rather peeved special magistrate, Poulters, punished the estate manager for the related offenses. 3 months after this incident, the local council and House of Assembly reacted to address further occurrences of claims against fathers for child support by passing the Bastardy Act to require fathers to support their illegitimate children. Obviously, this law meant that the colonial authorities had another weapon to force black men also to earn cash on the estates to support their children as well.
Thank you very much. And so he'll really be proud of you. You learn a lot from gender and women in the Caribbean. I thank you very much. Now, when we discussed that, we invited a gender specialist, Dr. Denny's former student and my neighbor, Dr.
Bronte Liverpool.
Yeah, and she works at Mona. She works at Mona, Professor. You should know her. So I thank everyone for the reading. We are at the thank you, and I'm going to call on Dr. Carter to deliver the first set of thank yous, and I will do the second set of thank yous. Welcome, Dean Carter, once more.
Gives me great pleasure to thank all of you for coming to this book launch tonight. There's some people I want to thank. First want to thank the persons who have so diligently prepared the callaloo soup, and the macaroni pie, and the rice, and the peas, etc. Give them a round of applause. The Caribbean cuisine coming from the Mount Restaurant. We thank Petra and her team. I also want to thank my team. This is the persons within the office of the dean, led by Nicole. Let me give Nicole a shout out. Nicole, turn around and let everybody see you. Nicole, Glasgow. Miss Glasgow. Let everybody see Miss Glasgow here. She's the AA in the dean's office. Kelia Anderson. Where's Kelia? Yes, let everybody see you. Shaquan is here as well, Phillips. And Kerry Lucas is in the back. Kerry, stand and let everybody see you. These are the hardworking persons we have in the faculty office. They attend to the normal faculty duties, but because of what we are doing in the faculty, their work has increased tremendously. So we thank you for coming out tonight, and still, of course, they got to get back to the campus tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. It's a hard work for them. I also want to thank our videographers, led by Mr. Eversley. Where's Mr. Eversley? Yes. And Sherwood McCaskey. Thank you so much. I want to thank Rashid, our MC. Where's Rashid? Excellent job. Normally, we give him a round of applause. Yes. This is the second time we have asked Rashid to come to the party in such a forum, and he has done this at very short notice, and we thank you so much for that. I also want to thank Dr. Scott and Dr. Denny and Dr. Fraser for doing this mammoth work. Thank you. Special thanks to our bookshop, led by Joan Phil Johnson. She's there waiting patiently. Give her a round of applause. Joan, we are coming to you very soon. I want to thank our students from the Constant Carmichael Project and the archaeologists as well. They've been a tower of strength to us in the last couple of weeks. We thank you, students. And if I were still in teaching, I would have given you 5 extra marks, but I can't do that. But Scott and Dr. Worrell could do that at this stage. So I plead with you to give them some extra marks just for the effort. Thank you, students. Did we forget anybody? That's it? Well, you thank the others for me then. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carter. I thank Vice Principal for coming and the Principal, Professor Clive Landis, for his support. I'm going to begin with the technical people because we always forget technical people. I thank for this set Bell Productions, VFM, Jules, Managing Director, flew in to make sure that we didn't have any hiccups. Nice Radio, Douglas Freitas, Bayhillnews in St. Vincent, Montgomery Cupid. You see, when they call people wrong name, you just forget the other section. Then we have in Canada, Concardi Radio, and there's some other radio stations in New York. I can't remember the name. Monty, can't remember the name. I thank as well Jackie, Deborah Murray. She's the Callaloo specialist, saltfish. She's going to get that. We have Vinci Sunset Strong Rum. Don't drink too much of it. We have Hyrule Beer, and so on. Who else I have? Who else we have to thank? Oh, I can't remember. Oh, yes. I thank, where's Colin Spencer? Colin Spencer, the Romancia Murray. Romancia is in New Vinci. She was on a show in St. Vincent a few weeks ago, and she said, anything to Vinci, I did. I'm Vinci. And I thank Andre Lane, Apollo, come. You ain't get the stage tonight. You're in the background. Apollo is doing a PhD in the steel pan.
This is the definition of being put on the spot. Being on that spot, I would just like to congratulate Cleve, who's my supervisor, and Denny, as well as their fellow authors on what Dr. Carter has described as a mammoth work. I'm looking forward to reading it and having my signed copy, as I'm sure all of you are, so I won't keep me any longer. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no singing for you tonight. Not at time. That's it. Refreshments, and thank everyone for coming.
Before we go, we have some presentations So we go to so I'm going to ask our MC to come back and call the person who's supposed to be presented. Helia come and go with the book. So we over to MC.